Reaching for Research by Students for Students was created by the BIO5 Institute to introduce our experiences to undergraduate and high school students interested in working in research labs. Listen as our guests describe their path to STEM and their current work, so you too might join a lab and discover more within the world of science. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Reaching for Research by Students for Students. My name is Jordan Pilch, and I'm a senior here at the University of Arizona, studying microbiology, and I also work at the BIO5 Institute as a public affairs student assistant. Today, we welcome Catie Holt, who is a sophomore at the University of Arizona. Catie, thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. As you said, I'm a sophomore and I am majoring in physiology and medical sciences with a minor in health and human values. I'm super excited to be here.
Thank you. Those are really interesting. And you'll have to tell us more about your minor in health and human values. I believe we've had another interviewer who has talked about that as well. So it'll be interesting to get a different perspective on it. But to start, our first question is, what has been your journey through STEM and how did you get into your current research position?
Yeah, so my journey through STEM started in middle school with two incredible math and science teachers who inspired me to love the subjects because I hadn't really enjoyed them before. In high school, my love for science only continued to grow, and so that's kind of why I went into physiology. And then I got into my research lab through one of my classes this past semester, actually. I was in a class for honor students in physiology, and one week we were supposed to choose from a list of labs to do a virtual lab tour at. I picked the lab that looked the most interesting to me, and then the day of the tour, I found out that my Physio 202 lab TA was actually one of the co-hosts for the tour.
That's
At the
so
end of the
cool.
Tour, yeah, it was really awesome. It was kind of small world experience, which was
You're
really
like,
cool.
oh my God, we do things together and you're also here? I have an in.
Yeah, it was great. And then it was actually really convenient because at the end of the tour, they said they were looking for undergraduates to get involved in the lab. And so they asked us to contact them if we were interested. So I emailed my lab TA since I already had a connection to her. And she got me connected to my lab manager. And ultimately we determined that the lab and I would be a good fit. And I started soon thereafter. I stayed on for the summer as a volunteer, and starting in the fall, I'll start getting credit for my research.
That's really interesting. I'm so glad that you had that connection. You mentioned that during high school and middle school, you had really gotten interested in science. What specific science, since that's such a broad subject? Were you very interested in animal biology? Were you interested in molecular and cellular stuff? Were you interested in architecture? What was your main area of interest?
Yeah, so my favorite science class I ever took was physiology. I also really loved chemistry in high school. Biology was interesting, but it wasn't my favorite. But actually, my 8th grade science teacher, it's not a subject that I necessarily love, but he was so incredible that it didn't really matter.
Love when you have those teachers. The ones that are just inspiring in and of themselves, you know?
Yeah.
I think that that's really cool. Do you see your current research reflecting what you were interested in with physiology and chemistry specifically?
Yeah, so my research lab studies sleep, and another reason why it was a really good fit for me is I have a severe sleep disorder. So sleep has been super interesting to me since I got my diagnosis, because it actually was very difficult to come to the diagnosis because I didn't show a lot of the symptoms that they would expect. So just having that background going into a sleep lab is super interesting for me.
You're actually our second student who has gone into research based on I don't want to say disease because I feel like that's too harsh. Thank you. A diagnosis that they currently have. Our previous student had talked about being a type 1 diabetic and entering into a type 1 diabetes research lab. And I think that it's also really cool that you have, not cool that you have the disease, but that you've allowed it to kind of introduce you to something else that you're passionate about.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So that kind of ties into our next question, which is, what are you currently doing inside of that research lab?
Yeah, so I am in a research lab that studies a bunch of different areas of sleep. Personally, I'm currently involved in a team working on a clinical trial. Um, we are studying a device that gives off infrared light to see if it helps people that have symptoms of insomnia, like help them sleep better, get better quality sleep, relax,
Very
and fall
important.
asleep faster, that kind of thing. So hopefully it works.
We keep our finger crossed. Why did you decide, or why did the lab decide to use infrared technology to go through and help with this? Why was that something specific?
So the lab actually didn't create the device. We had a business owner that created it for a very different reason, actually, come to us because he did a trial with it for that original reason. He created it to try to stimulate hair growth. It didn't work for that. Okay, I know it sounds
That's a
weird.
very different set of things. This is my device for hair growth, and now we're using it for sleep research. How did
Right.
that
So
connection happen?
in his trial where he was trying to see if it would stimulate hair growth, it didn't work. But all of his participants said that they were feeling much more relaxed. They felt like they were sleeping better,
Hmm.
um, that kind of thing. So he's like, well, I want to do a clinical trial. So he found my PI and he talked to him about it. So now we're doing the clinical trial for him.
That's really interesting. Was there any background research to show that something like the device that had been created could lead to more restful sleep? Or what was kind of the ethos that your PI said yes to?
I actually wasn't in the lab when this
Mm,
happened, so I don't really know any of the details that happened before the research, like the clinical trial came to fruition,
mm,
just because like by the time I was in the lab, they were already working on like putting the clinical trial together.
yeah.
It just took a really long time because of communication issues with like the different companies we had to use.
Oh, yeah. That's really interesting. So what specific part do you have in that? You mentioned before we'd started recording that you're kind of coordinating Zoom calls. What do you do to facilitate this clinical trial?
So my supervisor is actually out of the country. She's been out of the country for most of July. She gets back today, actually.
Fun times.
So I've been kind of running the behind the scenes for the most part. I check the data every day to make sure that we're getting the data from the Aura rings that we're using to track their sleep.
Mhm.
I also send out reminder texts to the participants every time they have to wear the neck device that we're testing because it's every other day that they wear it.
Yeah.
Um, I also run some Zoom calls. Like we had intake interviews, which my supervisor did before she left to just enroll participants.
Mhm.
And then I ran a couple of Zooms where it was impressions interviews, where we got like the initial impressions of our participants before they started the trial once they got their materials.
Mhm.
And it's also where we like walk them through how to use the materials. And
It's a
then
lot of
I've also
steps to
done a
get
few,
there.
yeah. And then our debrief interviews, we just kind of fill out a red cap survey, getting their experiences, seeing how they thought the devices worked or not. Um, and then I go in and I transcribe that as well.
Oh my goodness, transcribing things is a pain. I am
Yes.
currently working in a qualitative research lab focused on STEM education. And my honors thesis is all about studying previous audio that we've gotten. And I have to go through and transcribe it before I can do any research on it. I feel you. That's a difficult task, and I applaud you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, transcribing is definitely probably the worst part of it just because it's very tedious. And
Yeah.
sometimes going back, I'm like, what are they saying?
Because microphones are not always the easiest thing to come by. And you're like, oh, it'll be fine. And then you're working with it later, and it's like, this was not a good decision. We should have done something different. Um, So it sounds like what you're doing right now is much more of the beginning parts of the research. Have you started to do any analysis on it? What types of analysis are you going to do?
So we have not started analysis to my knowledge, especially since my supervisor isn't here and there's no one else that's like assigned to this project. So right
Mhm.
now it's kind of me and then my lab manager helps when I need the
Yeah.
assistance. Um, so we haven't started analysis. I'm assuming we're going to look back at the surveys that we get from the debrief, and then we will also look at the ring data to see if those align. Um, but as of right now, it looks like we have enough evidence to support that it at least helps people relax. So I think we're going to go into a phase 2
Okay.
of the experiment where right now we only have 5 participants, which means it's pretty easy to keep
Pretty
track
small.
of like
Yeah.
on my own. Phase 2 is 30 participants, so it's a good thing
That's a
I'm
lot
not going to
more.
be by myself because I couldn't. Uh, yeah, but so right now it looks like we're probably going to do a phase 2, but obviously I don't know for sure and I can't necessarily discuss that too much.
Yeah, because this is still unpublished data. Thank you so much for showing the deference in doing that.
Yeah.
To those that are listening, sometimes you can't go through and talk about data because it's not quite published yet, and that would be a violation of a grant or something like that. And especially with human subjects, it's a little bit more difficult to talk about. Uh, Thank you so much for describing your research to us and kind of how you got there with the happy coincidence of your lab TA being a lab mentor or a graduate student in that lab. That's really cool. And definitely someplace that our listeners should look for when trying to decide to get into a research lab themselves. Talk to people you already know. All right. Outside of your work in STEM, what are other things that you're passionate about? What do you like to do that keeps you motivated?
Yeah, so it might sound a little cliche, but I do really love just serving others. In high school, that looked like serving in a local hospital and doing a couple other things in my community. It looks a little different in college right now, and I'm actually like, I'm doing some service in some areas,
Yeah,
but I'm currently still kind of trying to find ways to serve the community that are more well-rounded, just so I'm a more well-rounded individual.
always important.
And then also just surrounding myself with a community of people and friends that um, just kind of keep me going through the week, especially when it's a rough week, and just help keep me motivated, especially if they're STEM friends. That's the best because we can just bond over our struggles.
Bond over, oh my gosh, I have to take organic chemistry next semester.
Yeah,
Oh boy. So,
exactly.
what areas of serving people are you currently involved in, or have you previously been involved in throughout college?
Yeah, so I started um, teaching some third graders every week um, a couple months ago, and that's been really awesome. For a while, I was serving at Banner, but I had to take a step back this summer because of all the commitments I was starting to struggle with.
Yeah.
Um, but I would love to get back into that. I really do like being in the hospital environment. So I'm hoping once I like figure out my schedule, I'll be able to go back to doing something there.
Mhm.
Um, I also would like to just get out into the community somewhere that's not necessarily medically related, um, because I think it's important to not have just one focus.
I agree. I definitely like that. You said that you liked being in the hospital setting, though. Does that mean that once you get your degree, are you considering going to medical school or nursing school?
Yeah, the original plan when I came to college was to go to medical school. Right now, I'm actually thinking PA school and becoming a physician's
Okay.
assistant. Um,
Yeah.
but I'm kind of trying to keep my options open because I'm not 100% sure what I want to do and I don't need to know right now.
Yeah,
Um, so I'm just trying to, that's also why I want to get some clinical experience because that would hopefully help me make a final decision.
I agree with that. It's definitely important to keep your options open, especially earlier on in your college career as compared to later. What areas are you considering doing service in outside of that medical setting? You said you wanted to become a more well-rounded person. Do you want to do it more culturally with some of the museums? Do you want to do it more artistically? What are you kind of thinking?
I'm not 100% sure what I want to do yet. I am definitely not artistic, so probably not that. But I think I'm kind of open to anything right now. I kind of have to figure out like what I'm interested in because I don't have a whole lot of experiences outside of the medical field. Just
Yes,
because in high school that was like my focus. And now I'm like, well, I want to explore other things and just see like how else I can get involved in the community. So I don't know yet.
you'll figure it out as you go. And that's something important again for the audience to know. It's okay to have no idea. You kind of just got to learn it. And I applaud you for taking the chance to start exploring other areas than the one that you know you're passionate about. And that kind of takes us to our final question. What is one piece of advice that you would give to your 16-year-old self? And what is a piece of advice you would give someone who is wanting to join research?
Yeah, so a piece of advice I would give my 16-year-old self is just to enjoy high school and to not stress as much as I did. My perfectionism definitely caused me a lot of unnecessary stress and anxiety, which made stopping and enjoying life much more difficult. Along with that, I would remind myself to be intentional with my time and how I spend it, and to be more intentional with my relationships.
I
Time
definitely
really
feel
felt
you.
like, yeah, time felt like it went slowly in the moment. But looking back, high school went by super quickly, and I have some regrets as to how much pressure I put on myself and how I spent so much of my precious time on school and things I wasn't necessarily always passionate about when I could have spent that time making memories instead.
I feel you. I
Yeah.
also have the perfectionist nature inside of me. I have not taken the step that you have taken, which is to say sometimes it's okay for it to not be perfect. And I just have to echo you on that. Sometimes it's okay to give only half the effort. You're still doing something, and that's still important.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely still struggle with the perfectionism, don't get me wrong, but I'm trying to remind myself that it's okay, like, to take a step back, and as long as I do my best, like, that's what I was able to do.
Oh, yeah.
And
All
then
right. Oh,
advice for people that want to go into research, I would say just find something that you're passionate about. Don't be so focused on um, like you need to get into research and you do something you don't like because that's not going to be productive. Um, for me, it worked out really, really well. Sometimes it's harder to get into a research lab, so just stay persistent. Just keep your head up and keep trying because eventually someone's gonna take you in, and it's gonna be a really good experience.
I definitely agree with that. Doing something you're passionate about is way easier to do than doing something that's just there as a reason. So I also definitely agree
You
with you
guys can
there.
tell when you're not passionate.
It's very obvious when you're there and you're just trying, but it's not really working out. Others can definitely tell. All right. Well, thank you so much to everybody who is listening to this episode of Reaching for Research by students for students. And thank you again to Catie. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm glad I could come.
All right. Well, to everybody listening and to you, Catie, I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks. You too.
If you are interested in learning more about research opportunities here at the University of Arizona, please visit the Research, Innovation, and Impact website and click on their graduate or undergraduate resources. Like Catie said, always be sure to reach out to those in your classes to hear more about opportunities available to you. Thanks for listening to Reaching for Research by students for students, and we can't wait to see where you go in research.